When did your boyfriend's parents realize they were wrong for treating you like trash? After they found out I was secretly wealthy. My boyfriend Lewis had warned me on the phone that morning. Look, my parents can be difficult, but I talked to them and they promised to be on their best behavior tonight. I smiled. It's cute when you worry, but I got this. I spent 4 hours making my family's cinnamon apple pie. They say the best way to a person's heart is through their stomach, I told him confidently. But in the Uber to their estate, I was nervous as heck. My hands were shaking when I knocked on their door. His mom opened it and looked me up and down like I was a salesperson. You must be Eliza, she said. It's Beth, yes. It's so nice to meet you. Her eyes landed on the wine and apple pie in my hands. She fought back a disgusted look. Is this from Trader Joe's? Yes, I said. It's actually my favorite. It's a little bit pricey, but... Oh, this wine is pricey for you? She asked, giggling. She set the wine down beside the trash can and led me to the dining room. At dinner, his dad didn't wait long. So, what do you do for work? Lewis mentioned something about volunteering. I'm between positions right now, I replied. Between positions, his mom repeated to his sister. That's what they call unemployed now. His sister laughed. I love your dress. So vintage. Where did you find it, Goodwill? I glanced down at my silk dress and smiled gently. It was my mother's, actually. Of course it was. She turned to Lewis. Remember when you dated Sarah? Now she had style. Actual designer style. Lewis frowned, shifting in his seat uncomfortably. Guys, can we not do this tonight? I'm just saying, his mom interrupted. Some girls are raised with class. It's not something you can learn. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room, his mom stopped me and smiled, pointing at the table. You don't mind, do you? I started clearing plates while they sat on the couches laughing. Lewis stood up to help, but his mom pulled him back down. Don't be silly, she's fine. This is just wifely duties. His sister-in-law walked over and dropped her wine glass into the sink while I was washing, splashing soapy water on my dress. You missed a spot on that plate. My housekeeper would have been fired for that. His mom came into the kitchen and stood uncomfortably close while I scrubbed the last few dishes. Beth, right? We need to discuss something. Our family requires prenups, ironclad ones. You understand why, don't you? Some girls see our Lewis as a meal ticket, but not Sarah. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of Lewis with a stunning blonde at a formal suit and tie event. I never really understood why he ended things with her. I heard she's a federal prosecutor now, a girl with real ambition. Oh, but don't worry, it's lovely you're so great at cleaning. It might get you somewhere too, she added. That's when Lewis walked into the kitchen and snatched the phone from her hands, deleting the photo. Can you all just quit messing with Beth and give her a chance? His mom rolled her eyes. Can't you see we just don't like her? She doesn't fit with the family. The poor marry the poor, and the rich marry the rich. That's how it's always been and always will be. The entire family started yelling at each other, with Lewis calling them shallow and them calling me a waste of space and a gold digger. Then the doorbell rang, making everyone in the room freeze. A man in a $3,000 suit rushed in and pulled me to the side. Beth, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but the board is in an emergency session and won't proceed without you. The deal with the Tokyo company is on the line. He held up an iPad showing a video call with 20 people in a boardroom. I dried my hands. How much are they demanding? I took the iPad, scanning the contracts while Lewis's entire family watched in silence. That's $400 million over market. Tell Yamamoto 9M or we walk. While I spoke to the board, Lewis's dad laughed. This is a prank, right? To make you look good in front of us. The man who had rushed in glared at the father and asked them to remain silent. 1 second, I told the board and looked at the family. This isn't a prank. I said I was between positions. I'm transitioning from CEO to chairman. My father's retiring. But you shop at Trader Joe's, his mom argued. I own shares for Trader Joe's, if that counts. Oh, and the wine you threw away? That was actually a $3,000 bottle from my family's vineyard in Italy. I just put a Trader Joe's sticker so you can enjoy the drink without worrying about the price. His sister grabbed her phone, frantically Googling. She covered her mouth and pointed at me with a shaky finger. Oh my God, you're that Beth. I finished the call. Done. 9 billion approved. Thank you, I told the man before he left. Lewis stood still, completely shocked by the turn of events. I reached out and held his hand. You defended me all night thinking I had nothing and was no one important. His eyes looked back at me longingly. Of course I would. I love you. That's when his mom suddenly turned friendly, smiling at me. So when's the wedding? I raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, but none of you will be invited. That's when things really started getting out of hand. His mom's antics became violent the closer we got to the wedding, and his sister started blowing up my phone with texts before we even got to the car. I sat in the passenger seat of Lewis's car, hands still shaking, staring at his family's estate through the window. The porch light made everything look fake, like a movie set. His mother's face kept replaying in my mind. That moment when I told her none of them was invited to our wedding. Her smile had frozen, then cracked, then twisted into something ugly. I knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something way bigger and messier than a bad dinner party. Lewis squeezed my hand hard, pulling me back to the present. He took a deep breath and turned to face me in the dim car. We needed ground rules before we did anything else about wedding planning. No more flying by the seat of our pants. We talked for almost an hour in that car, our voices low and serious. We agreed his family needed to show real change through their actions, not just words. No fake apologies or promises they wouldn't keep. And we weren't setting a wedding date until we saw consistent respect over time, not just one good week. My phone kept buzzing in my lap the whole time we talked. Text after text after text. His mother, his sister, even his dad sent one. I showed each message to Louis without responding to any of them. Half the texts were apologies, half were demands. His mother kept insisting I was being dramatic and that family forgives. His sister wrote that I was tearing their family apart over nothing. I felt my jaw tighten reading them, but I didn't type back. This boundary needed to hold. The next morning, my father called me before my first meeting. I was in my home office, still in my pajamas, trying to prepare for the day. He'd already heard about the dinner somehow. Probably from someone on the board who knew someone who knew Louis's family. He was worried the whole thing might leak to the business press. I felt my frustration building as he talked. He was managing me like a PR problem instead of checking if his daughter was okay after a terrible night. But I listened to his concerns about optics anyway, because that's what you do when you're about to become chairman. I promised him I had it under control and ended the call faster than I probably should have. At the office, I met with Kenji in my private conference room. He briefed me on how the board had reacted to last night's emergency session. Most of them thought I'd handled the Tokyo deal perfectly under weird circumstances. A few were curious about my personal life, but knew better than to ask directly. Kenji walked me through the next steps for closing the deal over the next 2 weeks. Sitting there talking about contracts and international business made me feel steady again. This was a space where my competence wasn't questioned. People treated me with professional respect here. Nobody cared what I wore or where I shopped or whether I was good enough. I scheduled an afternoon meeting with Haley to talk about media strategy. She came to my office with her laptop and a serious expression. We needed to prepare a statement just in case the dinner story leaked somehow. We spent an hour crafting something short and boring about private family matters. I made it super clear to her that I wanted complete privacy if possible, but I also wanted to be responsible and prepared. Better to have a statement ready than to scramble if some gossip site picked up the story. That evening, Louis met his parents alone at a coffee shop across town. I stayed home, pacing around my condo, checking my phone every 5 minutes. He'd insisted on doing this without me there. He needed to set boundaries as their son, not as my defender. When he got back 2 hours later, he looked exhausted. He'd told them our timeline was ours to control, that their behavior at dinner was completely unacceptable, that apologies needed to come with changed actions over time, not just words in the moment. His mother had cried. His father had argued, but Louis had held his ground. The next morning, I was in a meeting on the 42nd floor when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. Security was calling from the lobby. Louis's mother had shown up unannounced at my office building. She was telling the reception desk she was my future mother-in-law and needed to see me urgently. She was playing the victim, saying I was keeping her from her son. I felt my space being invaded, my professional life contaminated by this family drama. But I stayed calm. I called security directly and instructed them to ask her to leave the building. She wasn't on any visitor list. She had no appointment. She needed to go. They escorted her out within 10 minutes. I went back to my condo right after work and pulled up the security footage from the lobby on my laptop. I documented everything with timestamps. Screenshots of her at the reception desk, video of security walking her out. Then I opened my email and typed out a message to both of Louis's parents. My hands shook as I wrote it, but I felt powerful too. The email was neutral and professional. I was establishing a 30-day no-contact boundary unless we were in a mediated setting with a therapist present. No calls, no texts, no visits, no contact through other people. I attached the security footage as documentation of why this boundary was necessary. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 2 days later, I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when Louis's sister's story popped up. She'd posted a photo of herself with designer shopping bags, everything carefully arranged. The caption read something about people who buy their way into families they don't belong in. I could see the likes and comments piling up from their family friends. People I'd never met, all agreeing with her, all taking her side. I felt more annoyed than hurt, honestly. It was so petty and obvious. I showed Louis the screenshot and we both just shook our heads. I wasn't going to take the bait. I wasn't going to respond or engage or give her the reaction she wanted. Some battles weren't worth fighting. The next morning, I scheduled a video call with Haley to talk about damage control. She pulled up her laptop and showed me the analytics from the social media posts. Louis's sister's story had been screenshotted and shared in a few local gossip groups, but nothing had hit major news yet. Haley suggested we get ahead of it with a simple statement. We drafted something short that focused on my professional background and the charitable foundation work my family does. Nothing about Louis or his family, nothing defensive or angry. Just facts about my actual accomplishments. We agreed to hold off on any interviews for now. The goal was to keep the focus on my work, not on family drama or relationship gossip. After the call, I felt a bit more in control of the situation. At least we had a plan if things got worse. That afternoon, I met with Aldo at his law office downtown. He had his assistant bring us coffee while he pulled up the prenup documents on his computer. Aldo explained that he wanted to draft something that protected both Lewis and me equally. The usual financial stuff was standard, but he suggested adding specific clauses about boundaries. Things like requiring written consent before either of our families could access our home. Rules about third-party interference in major life decisions. Consequences if family members harassed either of us or our future kids. Seeing our values written out in legal language made everything feel more real and safer. I told Aldo to move forward with the draft. Having these protections in writing helped me believe we could actually build a life together without his family controlling everything. 5 days after we sent the boundary email to his parents, their attorney responded. Aldo forwarded me the email with a note that just said, "Brace yourself." I opened the attachment and started reading their proposed prenup. It was clearly designed to punish me. Every clause targeted my assets specifically. There were provisions that would give his family veto power over my business decisions if we had kids. Requirements that I give up my board position if we divorced. Limits on how much of my own money I could spend without his family's approval. I felt my jaw clench as I read through page after page of hostile legal language, but I wasn't surprised. This was exactly the kind of move I expected from them. I called Aldo and he told me not to engage with the emotion of it. We would counter with our reasonable version and let the lawyers handle the back and forth. No point in escalating the hostility by responding directly. My father called me that evening while I was making dinner. He didn't even say hello before launching into his concerns. The board had been asking questions about my personal life. Some members were nervous about headlines mixing business with family drama. He wanted me to consider postponing the wedding until things calmed down. Maybe wait 6 months or a year. I stopped chopping vegetables and put down the knife. I told him no. We weren't delaying our lives because of fear about what people might say. Lewis and I were moving forward on our own timeline, not the board's timeline or the gossip cycle's timeline. My father tried to argue that it was about protecting the company's reputation. I pushed back harder. I said I wouldn't let fear of gossip control my life decisions. There was a long silence on the phone. Finally, he said he understood, but he didn't sound happy about it. After we hung up, I felt shaky but proud of myself for holding that line. Lewis came over to my condo that night with takeout and his laptop. We sat on the floor of my living room and started making lists. First, we wrote out our non-negotiables. Things like both families respecting our privacy. No surprise visits. No social media attacks. No contacting our employers or colleagues. Then we created a communication protocol. All family contact would go through email or text, so we had documentation. No more surprise phone calls or doorstep ambushes. We set up consequences too. First violation meant a warning. Second violation meant 30 days no contact. Third violation meant we'd consider legal action. Lewis typed everything into a shared document while I organized it into categories. Working through this practical planning made me feel like we were actually partners building something together. Not just two people caught up in drama, but a team with a real strategy. 2 weeks after the dinner, a delivery person showed up at my office reception desk with a large box. My assistant brought it to my office looking confused. The return address was Lewis's parents' house. I opened it carefully, half expecting something awful. Inside were 3 hardcover books about etiquette and formal entertaining. Under those was a cleaning apron with little hearts on it. The note attached said something about how these might help me develop some useful skills for the future. I actually laughed out loud. It was so petty and obvious. I took photos of everything for our documentation file. Then I called my assistant and asked her to donate all of it to the thrift store down the street. The whole incident went into our harassment log with timestamps and photos. Later that night, I showed Lewis the pictures and we both just shook our heads. His mother was really committed to this mean girl routine. A few days later, Lewis's father sent me a private email asking if we could meet for coffee. Just the two of us. I showed Lewis the message and he said it was up to me, but he trusted me to handle it however I wanted. I agreed to meet at a quiet cafe across town. When I arrived, his father was already there, sitting in a corner booth looking uncomfortable. He ordered us both coffee and then sat there fidgeting with his cup for a minute. Finally, he started talking. He admitted he was scared. Scared of losing his son to my world and my money. Scared that Lewis would move into a life his father couldn't understand or access. Scared of becoming irrelevant to his own kid. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him I understood that fear. But I also said that fear didn't excuse the way his family had treated me. That respect had to come first, before we could build any kind of relationship. He nodded slowly and said he was trying. I believed he meant it, but I also knew meaning it and actually changing were two different things. The following week, we attempted a family dinner at a neutral restaurant. Everyone had agreed to ground rules beforehand. No personal attacks, no bringing up the past, no social media posting. We'd meet for 1 hour, have a civil meal, and leave. Lewis's parents arrived first. His mother was wearing a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. His father looked tired. Lewis's sister came with her husband. For the first 20 minutes, everything was painfully polite. People commented on the menu. Someone mentioned the weather. Then the server tried to seat his mother at a spot she apparently didn't like. too close to the kitchen or too far from the window or something. She stood up abruptly and announced she couldn't do this, that we were all being ridiculous, that she refused to be treated like a criminal just for caring about her son. Then she grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant. His father hesitated, looked at Lewis, then followed her out. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. Lewis and I sat there in stunned silence with his sister and brother-in-law. The server came back looking worried, asking if everything was okay. Lewis told him we'd be staying for dinner anyway. After we ordered, his sister-in-law excused herself to go to the bathroom. I waited a few minutes, then followed her out. In the parking lot, she was standing by their car, looking at her phone. When she saw me, she put it away quickly. Then she did something I didn't expect. She apologized. She said she was sorry about dropping the wine glass on my dress that first night, that she'd been mean because Lewis's mother had threatened to cut her off financially if she was nice to me, that the whole family dynamic was toxic and she felt trapped in it. I stood there processing this information. Part of me wanted to stay angry, but another part of me recognized that she was stuck in the same system that had tried to control me. I told her I appreciated the apology, that I understood the position she was in, but I also made it clear that understanding didn't mean I was ready to be close or trust her completely. She nodded and said that was fair. We walked back inside separately. The next morning, I was getting ready for work when Lewis called me from his apartment. His voice sounded weird. He told me to check my phone. I pulled up my browser and saw what he was talking about. Some tabloid had run a story with the headline about gold diggers and wealthy heirs. There was an old photo of me in jeans and a sweater standing next to Lewis in a suit at some charity event from months ago. The article made it sound like I was some poor girl who'd trapped a rich guy. They'd gotten half the facts wrong and invented the other half. I felt my hands start shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. I called building security and asked about any unusual activity. They told me there had been photographers outside since early morning. 2 guys with cameras waiting by the entrance. I looked out my window and saw a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. This was getting bigger than I'd expected. I texted Haley immediately and she called me back within minutes. We needed to meet and figure out a real crisis plan. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was turning into actual public attention that could affect my work and my company. Haley met me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my building where the photographers wouldn't think to look. She had her laptop open with a full media analysis spread across the screen. The tabloid story had been picked up by 2 smaller outlets and was getting shared on social media. She walked me through her plan for a controlled narrative reset. We would do 1 written interview with a respected business publication that focused on my actual work history and the philanthropic projects my family's foundation supported. No photos of me and Lewis together, no personal details about our relationship, just my professional track record and the work I actually cared about. I felt exposed agreeing to put myself out there like this, but Haley was right that staying silent would let other people fill in the story however they wanted. We spent 2 hours drafting talking points and reviewing the publication's reputation. The interview would happen over email, so I could control exactly what I said. By the time we finished, I felt slightly less powerless about the whole situation. The next morning, I had my regular board check-in meeting scheduled. I walked into the conference room and immediately felt the tension. Our stock had dropped 2% overnight. Nothing major, but enough that the board wanted to discuss it. Kenji stood up and pulled up a presentation showing the press coverage and its limited impact on our actual business operations. He'd already spoken with our Tokyo counterparties who told him they didn't care about American tabloid drama. They were focused on our quarterly projections and the deal we'd just closed. Kenji walked through the numbers showing our fundamentals were completely solid. By the end of his presentation, the other board members looked visibly relieved. One of them even joked that maybe the press attention would help our name recognition. I felt grateful for Kenji's steady presence and the way he'd handled this without me even asking. That afternoon, we had our company all-hands meeting. I stood in front of 300 employees and talked about my transition to chairman and what that meant for the company's direction. Then I addressed the elephant in the room. I told everyone that some personal matters had gotten media attention recently, and I wanted to set clear boundaries. If any reporters or media people contacted them asking about me, they should forward those requests to our communications team and not engage directly. I emphasized that I valued their privacy too, and wouldn't let my personal life create problems for them at work. Several people nodded, and a few came up afterward to say they appreciated the transparency. Walking back to my office, I felt more grounded than I had in days. Leading with honesty and keeping my focus on actual work helped me remember why I did this job in the first place. The next day, Kenji knocked on my office door looking concerned. He showed me his phone where Lewis's mother had left comments on our company's public LinkedIn page. She'd also sent connection requests to 3 of our vendors and 1 junior employee in our marketing department. The messages were vague, but clearly fishing for information about me. Kenji had already contacted our legal counsel, who drafted a formal cease and desist letter. We sent it that afternoon through our attorney with copies to her attorney. The letter made clear that any further contact with our employees or business partners would be considered harassment, and we would pursue legal action. I felt protective of my team and angry that she was dragging my workplace into her personal vendetta. But I was also glad we had proper legal channels to shut this down. That evening, Lewis called me from his apartment. His voice sounded flat and tired. His father had just informed him that his trust fund access was being cut off immediately. The stated reason was that Lewis had chosen me over his family and needed to learn the consequences of that choice. Lewis told me he'd already started sending out resumes and had 2 interviews lined up for next week. I drove over to his place and we sat at his kitchen table with our laptops open. We built a realistic budget based on his likely salary range and my current income. I offered to cover more of our shared expenses, but Lewis wanted to contribute equally. We cut out the expensive restaurants and planned cheaper date nights. I felt proud watching him handle this with such maturity. He wasn't panicking or running back to his family. He was building his own independence. 2 days later, I met with Aldo at his law office to review the latest prenup draft. He'd incorporated all our feedback about financial independence and added specific clauses about third-party interference. There was language protecting both of us from family members trying to access our finances or make demands on our marriage. The document spelled out that we each maintained separate accounts and decision-making power over our own assets. Reading through it, I felt cautious optimism building. The legal paperwork was actually reflecting our shared values, instead of just protecting wealth. Aldo explained each section carefully, and I took notes on a few small changes I wanted. This felt like real progress toward a partnership that honored both of us. That weekend, Lewis and I sat in my living room surrounded by wedding planning materials. We'd originally imagined a ceremony with 150 guests at a historic venue downtown. Looking at everything spread out in front of us, we both felt overwhelmed. Lewis suggested we scale way back. What if we did something small and private instead? Just close friends and the family members who actually supported us? I felt immediate relief wash over me. A smaller ceremony meant less pressure, less expense, and way less drama. It meant his family would have fewer opportunities to cause problems. We started making a new list of maybe 30 people we truly wanted there. The intimacy of it felt more meaningful than any big production would have been. The next Tuesday, we went to a small bakery for a cake tasting appointment. We'd specifically chosen a place off the beaten path where we thought we could just be a normal couple picking out dessert. The owner brought out 6 different samples, and we were laughing about the weirdly specific flavor combinations when the door opened. Lewis's mother walked in wearing sunglasses and a tense expression. She pulled off the sunglasses and stared at me. She started talking about how I'd stolen her son and ruined her family. I stood up and told Lewis we should leave. That's when she moved toward me quickly and shoved me hard with both hands. I stumbled backward into a display table covered in sample cakes. The whole thing crashed to the floor and I landed on my side. Pain shot through my arm where it hit the table edge. Lewis immediately pulled out his phone and called security while helping me up. The bakery owner was already on her phone calling the police. I pulled up my sleeve and saw a dark bruise already forming on my forearm. I took several photos with my phone, making sure the timestamp was visible. My hands were shaking, but I made myself document everything clearly. We drove straight to the police station. An officer took us to a private room where I gave a detailed statement about what happened. I showed him the photos of my bruise, and the bakery owner had already sent over security camera footage. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges. Lewis and I looked at each other. I told the officer I wanted a formal incident report filed, but I wasn't requesting an arrest at this time. I wanted documentation that this happened and a clear record of the escalating behavior. The officer nodded and said that was reasonable. He printed out a copy of the report for me and gave me a case number. Walking out of the station, I felt shaken but also strangely calm. We'd drawn a clear line and created official consequences. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was documented assault with legal records. The next morning, Lewis called his parents' attorney and dictated an ultimatum. His mother needed to enter mandatory therapy immediately. Both his parents needed to provide written apologies that specifically acknowledged the harm they'd caused. They needed to follow all the boundaries we'd set without exception. If they couldn't do these things, Lewis was choosing no contact indefinitely. The attorney said he'd relay the message and get back to us. Lewis hung up and I saw how much the call had cost him. I was proud of him for setting these terms, but I was also scared. I didn't know if his family would actually follow through with real change, or if they'd just escalate further. We sat together on my couch not talking, just holding hands and waiting to see what would happen next. 2 days later, an email appeared in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Family Counseling Arrangements." I opened it and saw Lewis's father had written a short message saying he'd contacted 3 licensed family therapists and wanted to schedule sessions. He listed their credentials and availability. He wrote that he understood trust needed to be rebuilt through actions and he was committed to doing the work. I read it twice, then forwarded it to Lewis without adding any comments. My chest felt tight with something between hope and suspicion. Words on a screen were easy. Showing up week after week was different. Lewis called me an hour later and said his dad had texted him the same information. We agreed to pick the therapist with the most experience in high-conflict family dynamics and scheduled our first session for the following week. The therapy office had beige walls and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Lewis's mother arrived 10 minutes late wearing sunglasses she didn't take off until the therapist asked her to. The therapist introduced herself and explained the ground rules about respect and taking turns speaking. Lewis's mother sat with her arms crossed and barely made eye contact. The therapist asked her to share what brought her to counseling. She talked for 20 minutes about her own childhood in a wealthy family where status meant everything. She described her mother's obsession with maintaining appearances and how she learned that losing social standing was worse than anything. Her voice cracked when she talked about her fear that Lewis choosing me meant she'd failed as a mother. I sat there listening and felt unexpected sympathy mixed with anger. Understanding where her behavior came from didn't erase what she'd done. When it was my turn, I pulled out my phone and showed photos of the bruise on my arm. I described the bakery incident in specific detail. I listed other examples of harassment and boundary violations. The therapist took notes and asked Lewis's mother if she understood the harm she'd caused. She nodded slowly and said she'd been trying to protect her son but realized she'd gone too far. I stated my boundaries clearly for future contact. No unannounced visits. No contacting my workplace. No social media posts about me. Communication only through Lewis or the therapist until further notice. She agreed verbally, and the therapist documented everything. 3 days after the session, Lewis got a call from his sister. He put her on speaker while we sat in my living room. She told him she'd deleted all her Instagram posts about me and our relationship. Her voice sounded different, less sharp. She said she'd been applying to jobs outside the family business and had 2 interviews scheduled. She admitted she'd been financially dependent on their parents her whole adult life, and it made her feel trapped. She apologized for the things she'd said at dinner and online. Lewis thanked her and told her he was proud of her for making changes. After he hung up, I felt relief, but also doubt. People could delete posts easily. Following through on job applications and actually taking a position that paid less was harder. I wanted to believe she was serious, but I'd been burned enough times to stay cautious. The following week, I stood at a community center in a lower-income neighborhood for a foundation event focused on educational access. We'd partnered with local schools to provide free tutoring and college prep resources. I spent 3 hours talking with students and parents, helping set up computer stations and explaining scholarship opportunities. Haley stood near the back monitoring her phone and tracking social media mentions. Later, she showed me the analytics. The event had gotten positive local news coverage and supportive comments. The narrative was shifting from wealthy person drama to actual community work. Standing there surrounded by kids excited about learning opportunities made me feel grounded again. This work mattered more than any family conflict or tabloid story. 2 days later, my father asked me to meet him at his office downtown. I walked into the executive suite where I'd spent so much time over the years. He closed the door and we sat across from each other at the conference table. He pulled out a folder with transition documents and a proposed media plan. He asked my input on timing and messaging. We spent an hour going through details about the chairman role, board responsibilities, and how to announce it without exploiting my personal situation for publicity. He listened when I said I wanted the focus on business strategy and company values, not on my relationship drama. He agreed and made notes. For the first time in months, I felt like he was seeing me as a professional partner instead of a PR problem. Our relationship had been strained by his constant worry about optics. This conversation felt different, more respectful, more equal. The next Saturday evening, I hosted a small gathering at a private room in a quiet restaurant. My side of the family came, along with Kenji and Haley. Lewis arrived looking nervous, but my aunt immediately pulled him into conversation about his work. My father shook his hand and asked genuine questions about his career plans. Kenji talked with him about industry trends. Haley told funny stories from past PR disasters she'd managed. The whole evening felt calm and supportive. No one interrogated Lewis or made snide comments. My cousin showed us photos from her recent trip. My uncle talked about his new boat. Normal family conversation without drama or tension. I watched Lewis relax and laugh at my aunt's jokes. He fit naturally into my world when people treated him with basic respect. Walking out that night, I felt like I could finally breathe a little. At 11:30 that same night, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. I almost didn't listen, but something made me check. Lewis's mother's voice came through angry and slurred. She said the therapy was ridiculous and that I was poisoning her son against his family. She called me manipulative and accused me of using money to control Lewis. The message went on for 2 minutes with escalating accusations. I saved it and sent a copy to the therapist. Lewis and I had already agreed on our boundary. No contact outside of therapy until she completed her initial sessions and showed consistent change. I felt tempted to call her back or send a detailed response defending myself. Instead, I turned off my phone and went to bed. Reacting emotionally would only feed the conflict. The following week, Aldo called and asked Lewis and me to come to his office. He had the final prenup documents printed and ready for signatures. We sat together reading through each section. The agreement protected both of us financially and included specific clauses about boundaries against family interference in our marriage. It stated that neither family could make financial claims against us or use money to manipulate our relationship. Lewis picked up the pen and signed without any hesitation or questions. He didn't ask for changes or try to negotiate softer terms. Watching him commit to our partnership on paper made something settle in my chest. The anxiety I'd been carrying for weeks eased slightly. We had legal protection now, clear boundaries documented and enforceable. That evening at my apartment, Lewis and I sat at the kitchen table with notebooks and started the difficult conversation about his family and the wedding. I wanted our ceremony to be peaceful and focused on us, but completely excluding his family felt harsh if they were genuinely trying to change. We went back and forth for an hour. Lewis said his father had been consistent with therapy and making real effort. His mother was more complicated. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing conditions. They would need to complete a minimum number of therapy sessions. They would need to provide written apologies that acknowledge specific harmful actions. They would need to follow all our stated boundaries for at least 2 months without violation. They could attend the ceremony only, not the reception. They would have no speaking role. Security would be present. Lewis read my list and nodded. He added that any violation would result in immediate removal. I felt conflicted writing it all down. Part of me wanted his family there because I knew it mattered to him. Part of me wanted to protect our day from any possibility of drama. We agreed to present the conditions to his parents through the therapist and let them decide whether they could meet the requirements. 3 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at my office in a formal envelope. Lewis's father had written 4 pages acknowledging his enabling behavior and listing specific examples of harm he'd witnessed and failed to stop. He apologized for prioritizing family image over my dignity and safety. He explained the work he was doing in counseling to understand his patterns and make different choices. The letter felt sincere and specific, not generic. That same afternoon, Lewis received an email from his mother. The message was brief and typed. She wrote that she may have overreacted to our relationship and that she was working on managing her emotions better. The apology felt minimal compared to everything that had happened, but it was more than I'd expected from her. It acknowledged wrongdoing even if it didn't fully capture the scope of damage. Lewis and I sat together reading both messages. Progress was happening, slow and imperfect, but real enough to notice. We scheduled the mediated meeting for the following Thursday at the therapist's office. Both families would attend to discuss ceremony boundaries. I spent 2 days preparing a written document outlining specific rules including sobriety requirements, no unplanned interactions with me, designated seating arrangements, and a clear timeline for arrival and departure. Lewis reviewed my list and added a few items about his siblings maintaining appropriate distance. The morning of the meeting, I felt nervous but prepared. We arrived early and sat in the waiting room reviewing our notes one last time. His parents came in separately, his father first and his mother 10 minutes later. My parents arrived right on time with calm, neutral expressions. The therapist led us into a conference room with a large table and asked everyone to sit. I pulled out my printed document and slid copies across to everyone. The therapist started by acknowledging the progress made through individual counseling and the written apologies. Then she turned the floor over to me. I went through each boundary point by point. The ceremony would be alcohol-free for all guests. His family could attend the ceremony only, not the reception. They would sit in designated seats away from my family. No speeches or toasts from anyone. Security would be present and had authority to remove anyone causing disruption. The therapist would attend as an observer. His mother shifted in her seat and opened her mouth to object, but his father put his hand on her arm. Lewis spoke up and reinforced that these weren't negotiable terms. They were the conditions for attendance. His mother's jaw tightened, but she nodded stiffly. My father asked about the timeline, and I explained the ceremony would last 30 minutes, followed by a brief photo session. Then his family would leave before the private reception started. His sister wasn't present, but had sent word through their father that she accepted all terms. After 2 hours of discussion, we reached a formal agreement. His family could attend the ceremony with all the restrictions I'd outlined. Security personnel would be positioned at entrances, and the therapist would observe from the back. No reception access meant they'd leave immediately after photos. His father signed the agreement document the therapist had prepared. His mother signed too, but her hand shook slightly, and I couldn't tell if it was anger or nerves. Lewis and I both signed, then my parents signed as witnesses. The therapist made copies for everyone and scheduled a follow-up session for 2 days before the wedding. Walking out to the parking lot, I felt cautious relief. The contingency plans helped me accept their limited presence. Having everything documented and enforceable made the risk feel manageable. Lewis squeezed my hand and told me he was proud of how I handled the meeting. I just wanted it to be over and done with. Wedding week arrived faster than I expected. Haley worked quietly behind the scenes fielding media inquiries and keeping our venue location completely private. She'd set up a separate email account just for press requests and responded with a standard statement about respecting our privacy. A few photographers tried following us, but our security team redirected them. I ran on nervous energy all week, checking details obsessively and trying to stay present instead of thinking about everything that could go wrong. Lewis helped by taking over some of the vendor coordination and keeping me focused on one task at a time. We did a final walkthrough of the venue on Tuesday and confirmed all the security positions. The florist delivered samples and I approved the simple arrangements, reminding myself that less was more. Haley sent me daily updates on media activity, which stayed minimal thanks to her proactive management. By Thursday, I was exhausted but holding steady. We had one more therapy check-in session scheduled for Friday morning before the Saturday ceremony. On Wednesday afternoon, Lewis got a call from a firm he'd interviewed with 3 weeks earlier. He stepped into the bedroom to take it and came out 10 minutes later with a huge smile. They'd offered him a senior analyst position with a salary he'd earned entirely on his own merit. He accepted right there on the phone. That evening, we sat at my kitchen table with our laptops open and went through our finances realistically as a two-income household. Lewis had been anxious about feeling dependent on my wealth, so having his own income mattered deeply to him. We calculated rent we could afford together, discussed splitting household expenses fairly based on our individual salaries, and talked about keeping some finances separate while sharing others. I felt relieved watching him build his own professional identity. The conversation was practical and grounded, focused on partnership rather than dependence. We agreed to revisit our financial plan quarterly and adjust as needed. Seeing him this proud and settled made me more confident about our future together. Friday afternoon, we held a short rehearsal at the venue with just the officiant, photographer, and key participants. His mother arrived exactly on time wearing a navy dress and sunglasses despite being indoors. She removed them when the therapist reminded her about the agreed protocols. We walked through the ceremony sequence twice. The second time through, his mother made a comment about the simple flowers, calling them quaint, in a tone that wasn't quite a compliment. I felt my shoulders tense, but I stayed calm. Security stepped forward and did a verbal intervention exactly as we'd planned, reminding her about respectful behavior. His mother pressed her lips together and nodded. I felt steady rather than reactive, choosing not to escalate. The therapist made a note on her clipboard. His father apologized quietly to Lewis. We finished the rehearsal without further incident. Afterward, Lewis and I went back to our separate hotel rooms as planned. Traditional separation the night before felt right. I ordered room service, took a long bath, and tried to sleep. The morning of our wedding, I woke up at 6 and couldn't fall back asleep. I ordered coffee and sat by the window watching the city wake up. Around 7:30, I heard paper sliding under my door. I got up and found a small envelope with my name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a family recipe card for apple cinnamon bread and a brief note from his mother. The note said she understood the boundaries we'd set and would keep her distance today. She hoped we'd be happy. The recipe card had stains and worn edges like it had been used many times. Something in my chest softened slightly. I wasn't letting my guard down completely, but I appreciated the gesture. I tucked the card into my bag and got ready. My parents arrived at 9 to help me dress. The ceremony was scheduled for 11. I put on my simple white dress and looked at myself in the mirror. I felt ready. The ceremony proceeded quietly in our small venue with about 30 guests total. His parents sat on opposite sides of the aisle and away from my family as planned. His father wore a dark suit and kept his hands folded in his lap. His mother sat perfectly still with her purse on her knees. My parents sat in the front row on my side looking calm and supportive. Security stood at the entrances but stayed unobtrusive. The therapist sat in the back corner with her notebook. When the officiant signaled, I walked down the short aisle alone by choice. Lewis stood at the front looking nervous and happy. The ceremony lasted 28 minutes. No incidents occurred during the service. I felt present and grateful rather than over the top, happy, just steady, and focused on Lewis. His face watching me walk toward him made everything worth it. When the officiant pronounced us married, Lewis kissed me gently, and I heard quiet applause. We turned to face our guests, and I saw his mother dabbing her eyes with a tissue while his father smiled. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Our vows emphasized partnership, autonomy, and the concept of chosen family. Lewis spoke first about building a life based on mutual respect and supporting each other's independence. I talked about choosing each other every day and creating our own definition of family. The words felt deeply true coming out of my mouth. I got slightly teary speaking about trust and boundaries, about love that protects rather than controls. The grounded joy I felt was real, even though it wasn't the fairy tale moment some people imagine weddings to be. It was better because it was honest. Lewis squeezed my hands when I finished, and I saw his eyes were wet too. The officiant smiled and completed the ceremony. We signed the marriage certificate with our parents as witnesses. Then we moved outside for photos. We executed our structured exit plan exactly as rehearsed. The photographer took family photos quickly, starting with my side, then his side, then one photo with everyone together. The whole photo session lasted 12 minutes. His family left on schedule without drama, his father shaking Lewis's hand and his mother giving a brief, awkward hug. His sister had sent flowers with a card wishing us well. They walked to their cars and drove away. The relief I felt when they were gone was huge. My shoulders dropped and I could breathe fully for the first time all day. Lewis wrapped his arms around me and we stood there for a minute just holding each other. Our detailed planning had actually worked. The boundaries held. No incidents, no drama, just a simple ceremony with people who could respect our terms. I felt grateful and exhausted. Our private dinner reception with a small circle of close friends and family felt warm and relaxed. We'd rented a private dining room at a restaurant my family had known for years. 20 guests total, including my parents, Lewis's sister-in-law who'd apologized privately, and several colleagues who'd become friends. Haley attended and spent most of dinner chatting with my father about media strategy. Kenji gave a toast about sustainable leadership and authentic relationships, talking about how the strongest partnerships are built on mutual respect and clear communication. He raised his glass and everyone joined in. The low-key celebration felt more meaningful than any big production would have. We ate good food, told stories, and laughed without worrying about drama or judgment. Lewis held my hand under the table and I felt genuinely happy. This was what I'd wanted all along. connection without performance, celebration without stress. When dessert came out, I looked around the table at people who'd supported us through everything and felt deeply thankful. We'd made it through and come out stronger on the other side. The next day, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Haley and a string of texts with links to tabloid articles. I scrolled through them while drinking coffee, reading headlines about our secret ceremony and mystery bride hides billionaire status. The articles had almost no real information because we'd controlled access so tightly. Most of them just recycled the same photo of me from a business conference 6 months ago. I texted Haley back saying I'd seen them and felt surprisingly okay about it. We'd done the groundwork, kept the venue private and limited who could leak details. The stories had nowhere to go without fuel. I put my phone down and finished my breakfast without that tight feeling in my chest I'd had for weeks. Lewis came into the kitchen and asked if I'd seen the press coverage. I nodded and told him it was fine, that we'd expected some noise and this was manageable. He looked relieved and kissed my forehead before pouring his own coffee. We didn't spend the morning calling lawyers or crafting statements. We just let it exist as background noise that would fade on its own. 3 days later, Lewis drove to his therapist's office to meet his mother for their scheduled post-wedding check-in. I stayed home because the session was specifically for them to process the wedding and discuss next steps. He texted me an hour later saying it went better than expected. His mother had agreed to continue her anger management sessions for another 6 months and signed up for a sobriety support program her therapist recommended. Lewis said she seemed tired rather than combative, like she'd finally accepted that fighting wasn't getting her anywhere. I felt something shift in my chest, not excitement or relief exactly, just a quiet sense that maybe things could actually improve over time. I didn't let myself expect too much though. One good session didn't erase months of harassment and violence. I texted back asking how he felt about it. He said hopeful but careful, which matched exactly how I felt. We were both learning to celebrate small progress without treating it like a complete transformation. 2 weeks after the wedding, I sat in a conference room with my security team reviewing our protocols. We'd ramped everything up before the ceremony with extra personnel at my office and condo, monitoring social media for threats, and keeping detailed logs of every incident. Now we needed to find a sustainable middle ground. I told them to scale back the extra staff but keep our core systems in place, including building access controls and the alert system for any concerning contact. My head of security walked through each protocol, and I approved or adjusted based on what felt necessary versus excessive. I noticed I wasn't jumping at every notification anymore, or checking my surroundings constantly. The hypervigilance that had become normal was slowly easing, but I wasn't naive either. We kept the important safeguards that would let us respond quickly if things escalated again. Finding that balance felt important, like I was reclaiming parts of my life without pretending the threats had never existed. The following Monday, I walked into our main boardroom for the official transition meeting. My father sat at the head of the table with the full board assembled around him. He announced my formal appointment as chairman effective immediately, and everyone clapped politely. Then he announced Kenji's promotion to COO in recognition of his leadership during the Tokyo negotiations and his steady guidance over the past year. Kenji looked genuinely surprised and pleased, shaking hands with board members who congratulated him. The meeting continued with final reports on the Tokyo deal, which had closed the previous Friday with terms even better than we'd projected. I felt satisfied watching everything come together smoothly, but I didn't need a celebration or speeches. This was just work getting done well by competent people. After the meeting ended, I shook Kenji's hand and told him the promotion was earned. He thanked me and said he looked forward to our continued partnership. My father pulled me aside briefly and said he was proud of how I'd handled everything, both the business transitions and the personal challenges. I appreciated hearing it even though I didn't need his validation anymore. That evening, Lewis and I sat on our couch with notebooks and laptops doing what we called our post-wedding debrief. We'd survived months of family drama, a complicated wedding, and major life transitions. Now we needed to set up systems to maintain what we'd built. We created a shared document outlining monthly boundary check-ins where we'd review any family interactions and make sure neither of us felt pressured or uncomfortable. We agreed that if either of us felt like we needed professional support, we'd schedule a therapy tune-up session without judgment or delay. Lewis added notes about his new job and how we'd handle finances going forward. I added reminders about keeping our relationship separate from family obligations. The whole conversation felt practical and grounded rather than romantic, but that's exactly what made it valuable. We were building maintenance systems for our partnership, treating it like something that required ongoing attention, rather than assuming love would fix everything automatically. When we finished, I felt connected to him in a deeper way, like we were genuinely on the same team working toward the same goals. A week later, I received a formal invitation in the mail to a charity gala. The return address showed it was from Lewis's sister and sister-in-law, who were co-chairing an event for an education nonprofit. A handwritten note inside outlined very specific ground rules, including limited interaction time, no discussion of family drama, and the option for me to leave early without explanation. I appreciated the clarity and the effort they'd made to establish boundaries up front. I texted Lewis's sister saying I'd attend and thanked her for the clear communication. The evening of the event, I wore a simple black dress and arrived alone since Lewis had a work commitment. His sister greeted me near the entrance and introduced me to several other board members. The conversation stayed light and professional, focusing on the nonprofit's programs and fundraising goals. His sister-in-law joined us later, and we talked briefly about the silent auction items. Nobody mentioned the wedding or family tension. When I left after 90 minutes, I felt cautiously warm toward both of them, like maybe we could build something cordial over time. I wasn't expecting close relationships, but polite distance with occasional positive interactions felt achievable. The next morning, I ordered a small apple pie from my family's bakery and had it delivered to Lewis's parents with a handwritten note. I kept the message brief, reiterating our boundaries about respectful communication and expressing hope that we could continue making progress together. I didn't expect a phone call or emotional response. His mother texted back 3 hours later with a simple thank you and a comment that the pie was good. That was it. No drama, no demands, no passive-aggressive additions. I sat looking at the neutral message and felt something settle in my chest. This was good enough. Not perfect, not warm, but respectful and appropriate. I'd spent so long wanting his family to love me or at least accept me fully. Now I could see that peaceful coexistence with clear boundaries was actually a better outcome than forced closeness built on pretense. I texted back a brief acknowledgement and put my phone away, feeling genuinely okay with where things stood. That Friday, Lewis and I had dinner at home, just the two of us with takeout from our favorite Thai place. Over pad Thai and spring rolls, he told me about a conversation he'd had with his father earlier that week. They'd met for coffee, and his father had apologized specifically for enabling his mother's behavior and for not standing up for me sooner. Lewis said his father admitted he'd been scared of conflict and had chosen the easy path of going along rather than doing what was right. Hearing Lewis describe the conversation, I watched his face and noticed how much lighter he looked. The tension he'd carried for months, that constant stress of being caught between his family and me, had visibly lifted. He wasn't defending anyone or making excuses anymore. He was just telling me about two adults having an honest conversation about respect and independence. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand, telling him I was glad they'd talked. Our partnership felt stronger for having gone through everything together. We'd set boundaries, held them even when it was hard, and come out the other side as a team that actually worked. 2 weeks later, I flew to a women's leadership conference where I'd agreed to speak on a panel about authentic success. The moderator asked questions about building a career while maintaining personal values and setting boundaries in professional and personal life. I talked honestly about the past few months, sharing how I'd learned that protecting your peace sometimes means disappointing people who want you to stay small. I mentioned setting boundaries with family members and the importance of building systems that sustain you rather than drain you. Several women in the audience nodded along and a few were taking notes. After the panel ended, 3 attendees approached me separately to say thank you for being real about the challenges. One woman said she'd been struggling with her in-laws and felt validated hearing that even successful people deal with difficult family dynamics. Sharing my experience in this context felt empowering in a way that was different from just surviving it privately. I was turning something hard into something potentially useful for other people, which gave the whole experience additional meaning. The following Tuesday, Lewis's father sent an email to both of us. He wrote that he'd like to invite us to a family dinner in 3 months, acknowledging that they needed to earn back our trust gradually through consistent, respectful behavior. He suggested a restaurant rather than their home, and said we could set whatever conditions made us comfortable. Lewis and I read the email together that evening and discussed whether to accept. We decided yes, but with clear ground rules including no alcohol, a 2-hour time limit, and the understanding that we'd leave immediately if anyone became hostile or disrespectful. I drafted a response outlining our conditions and Lewis approved it before I sent it. His father replied quickly, agreeing to everything. I felt like we were building something sustainable rather than pretending the problems had never happened. This wasn't about forgiveness or going back to how things were. It was about creating a new normal where everyone understood the boundaries and chose to respect them. That felt honest and achievable in a way that forced reconciliation never would have. The next week, I scheduled a meeting with Kenji to pitch an idea that had been forming in my head for months. We sat in the small conference room by my office, and I laid out my proposal for a company-wide program focused on workplace respect and handling discrimination complaints. Kenji listened carefully while I explained how the initiative would include mandatory training, clear reporting channels, and real consequences for violations. He nodded along and suggested we pilot it in 3 departments first, before rolling it out everywhere. We spent 2 hours mapping out the timeline and budget, and by the end of the meeting, I felt energized in a way I hadn't expected. Turning everything I'd been through into something that could actually help other people gave the whole experience new meaning beyond just surviving it. The following Friday marked our 1-month anniversary, and Lewis surprised me with a weekend trip to a small mountain town 3 hours away. We checked into a tiny bed and breakfast where the owner had no idea who I was and didn't care. Saturday morning, we hiked up a trail through pine trees and stopped at a lookout point where you could see the whole valley below. Lewis held my hand, and we talked about where we wanted to be in 5 years, what kind of life we wanted to build together. I felt genuinely happy sitting there on those rocks, peaceful in a way I wasn't sure would be possible during the worst of the family conflict. That evening, we ate dinner at a local diner, and nobody stared or whispered, just treated us like any other couple passing through. On Tuesday afternoon, his sister called my cell phone, which surprised me since we hadn't spoken directly in weeks. She told me she'd accepted a job offer in Seattle working for a tech startup, completely outside the family business and their financial control. I congratulated her and meant it, genuinely glad she was finding her own path, even though our relationship would probably always be somewhat distant. She thanked me quickly and hung up, but the call felt like another piece clicking into place. That evening, Lewis and I sat on our condo balcony with glasses of wine watching the city lights flicker on below us. I thought about how far we'd come from that awful dinner where his family treated me like I wasn't good enough, how we'd gotten married despite everything, how we were both working in jobs we'd earned on our own merit. We had boundaries that mostly held. His parents were doing the work in therapy. His sister was building independence. Nobody involved was perfect, but everyone was in a genuinely better place than that night. And sitting there next to Lewis in the quiet evening air, that felt like real success.